Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you were a part of Lobby DC, which happened yesterday? If you were, raise your hand. About 800 of you spent all day yesterday on Capitol Hill meeting with representatives and senators face to face. It is of vital importance. And Invisible Children, when we first started, we didn't understand how the process worked. We didn't understand how you actually mobilize and influence governments and institutions. And it was through conversations with the man that I'm going to introduce next that helped us understand how exactly we as citizens can change the world. First, for many of us, starting with the LRA, but going on to many other things. There are so many issues that need a summit like this. Even today, there are so many issues that need engaged people like this. And John Prendergast is one individual who is leading the charge. John Prendergast is the co-founder of the Enough Project to end mass atrocities, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Help welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, Brother Ben. Most of you probably don't know that Ben here had the brilliant idea of having a global dance morning in which all the government panelists would engage in a dance contest for peace. And he wanted me to do a solo interpretive dance instead of a speech. But of course, but Jason and Jed, of course, prevailed upon him to stick to management and let them handle the creative ideas. So we dodged that bullet. Throughout the last century, great changes here in the US and around the world have usually come about as a result of people's movements. The labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement, and the peace movement all have changed the course of history. We're all here today, except Ben, who just wants to dance. We're here because we are all a part of another people's movement, one dedicated to human rights in Africa and around the world, to ending mass atrocities globally. This people's movement for human rights helped free Nelson Mandela and end the system of racial discrimination known as apartheid in South Africa. This people's movement for human rights helped end 3 wars in West Africa, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and in Angola, when we as consumers said no to blood diamonds. The people's movement for human rights helped stop the use of starvation as a weapon of war in Darfur and protected hundreds of thousands of lives, and then pivoted and helped support the peaceful creation of South Sudan, the newest state in the world. The people's movement for human rights even helped create the political space and support for President Obama to decide to intervene and prevent a mass slaughter from occurring in eastern Libya. So you may not know this, but the next success story for the People's Movement for Human Rights is going to be to help arrest Joseph Kony and bring an end to the Lord's Resistance Army. Already, there is great progress because of your efforts and those of our panelists this morning. Since Invisible Children was created, the core number of LRA fighters is much diminished. Attacks are far fewer, and abductions are way down. There is still a crisis, but there is much movement in the right direction. Now let's remember, the LRA is just the tip of an iceberg in terms of global threats to civilians. Terrible atrocities are being committed in Congo, in Sudan, in Burma, and perhaps most urgently today in Syria. And in all of these places and in others around the world, just like with the LRA, civilian populations are being targeted. Women and children are bearing the brunt of this terrible violence through mass rapes, through child soldier abductions, and many other war crimes and crimes against humanity. Joseph Kony and the LRA are where we are starting, though, because this is winnable. If we do our job, the LRA can be finished in the next year. Throughout our lives, we are constantly faced with a very basic choice. Will we be upstanders or will we be bystanders? By coming here today, my fellow upstanders, you have chosen, and the world is already changing because of you. Thank you so much.
This is the video introduction of the second panel of the international leaders. Check it out. To create a world where genocide and crimes against humanity are no longer possible, the entire global community must work together to achieve it. This is why we have invited representatives from the following international institutions. The International Criminal Court. The ICC was founded to indict and try the worst international criminals in the world. Joseph Kony was the first person they indicted. And once captured, they will try him in The Hague. The United Nations. The most famous global institution in the world, the UN has sent a representative to speak about their efforts to curb mass atrocities and their specific strategy on the LRA. The European Union. Made up of 27 member nations, the EU has fully supported international efforts to stop the LRA through humanitarian assistance and diplomatic leadership. Invisible Children welcomes these international leaders to the Global Summit on the LRA. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. Representatives from the International Criminal Court, the European Union, and the United Nations. This panel will follow a similar structure with opening statements, starting with the International Criminal Court. Thank you.
Thank you to Invisible Children for enabling and inviting the International Criminal Court to participate and contribute to this extremely important global summit on the LRA. And I wish to thank every single one of you here today. Your passion, your commitment, and your drive. That commitment to international justice is truly inspiring, so thank you. Now, we were asked to answer 3 questions from Invisible Children. First, what is your institution doing to stop the LRA's violence? Secondly, what challenges are you facing in achieving that goal? And finally, what do you need to be successful in your work? Now, first, as to the role of the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in helping to end the LRA's violence. Our role in doing so is by seeking to help to stop the LRA violence through our work to end impunity for the heinous crimes committed during that violence. We investigate and prosecute those most responsible for those crimes. In this case, Joseph Kony, Okoto Diambo, and Dominique Ongwen. Our court is the first permanent international criminal court for the world, established in 2002 by like-minded individuals like yourself, with the passion and the drive to see an end to impunity for the worst crimes. The very purpose of our court is to stop impunity for the most serious international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. When our office began its investigative work in 2004, the very first investigation that we started was into alleged crimes being perpetrated in northern Uganda, including by the Lord's Resistance Army led by Joseph Kony. July 2005, after a year-long investigation, our court issued arrest warrants against 5 of the most senior LRA commanders, including Joseph Kony, Odhiambo, and Ongwen, for crimes against humanity and war crimes. The crimes that we allege include mass killing, maiming, abductions, and sexual enslavement of children and adults, of children being forced to be soldiers. Not long after the ICC's arrest warrants were made public, the LRA began leaving northern Uganda, bringing the chance for peace and stability after 2 decades of violence and instability, but unfortunately moving into southern Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Central African Republic, where there are continuing reports of ongoing crimes being perpetrated by them. What are the greatest challenges we face in doing our work? First, we don't have an international police force. We can't arrest them ourselves. We rely on the cooperation of states, of the international community in achieving their arrests. Secondly, a handicap for our work is that not all states have signed up to the ICC. I know that there are approximately 60 countries represented here today. What can you do to help us in our work? First, you can go back to your countries and you can encourage those who have not already signed up to the ICC to sign up to it. Secondly, you can help us in gaining the active support of the international community, states in the region and beyond, in efforts to arrest these individuals so they can be brought to face justice before our court. Their arrest and surrender has to be at the top of the political agenda for all states, so we can turn our promise of never again into a lasting reality, because the cost of impunity is just too high, as we see from the actions of the LRA. To end their violence against civilians, Kony, Odhiambo, and Ongwen must be arrested. As individuals, we may feel like our contributions are mere drops in the ocean, but together, standing firm, we can make a sea change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prosecutor Luping. Next up, the Senior Advisor from the European Union.
Ben, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here amongst you, and I'm very pleased to see that there are several people from Europe. Maybe one of them would like to come forward and explain to everybody what the European Union is and how it works, and save me the trouble. I also want to let you know that in Europe, the young people are also mobilized. I can tell you because all the letters that are addressed to the High Representative for Foreign Affairs of the European Union come to me, and I have to answer them all, and boy, there are many of them. To sum up in a sentence, the European Union is like a sort of uneasy marriage of 27 states. And like any marriage, you do things alone and you do things together. one of the things that we're doing increasingly together is foreign policy. And in the course of that work, we came across the phenomena of the LRA a long time ago. And I can tell you what we saw, even gray-suited civil servants like myself knew that it was wrong and something had to be done. And we've been undertaking action now for several years. Because although the European Union may bicker about the euro and the size and cucumbers or whatever, we also represent core values: human rights, peace, justice, and democracy. And the first thing that we felt we had to do was the simple act of drawing a line and telling Joseph Kony and his people that what they were doing was not right and nobody was supporting them. Our diplomatic work is to make sure that no support goes to Kony from any corner of the world. And we're joined together in that with many other partners. The second thing we did was to offer our support to the countries affected by the LRA. Because after all, they are the ones in the front line. It is their primary responsibility to deal with the LRA. Essentially, we have been providing considerable quantities of funds. We're part of the program that you heard about in northern Uganda to help reintegrate ex-LRA and to rebuild that part of Uganda. We also offer funding in the humanitarian assistance to those that are in need now, today, across the affected areas in Congo, in CAR, in South Sudan. We have also decided that the approach that is probably the best to follow is a multifaceted approach. Military, yes, but also what we call civilian flanking measures. And the European Union has been particularly concerned with looking at how we can support these flanking measures, the defection programs and the reintegration programs. When the African Union became seized by the problem of the LRA and put forward a program, an initiative to help the 4 countries affected to coordinate better, we were the first to come forward to support the African Union in this vital endeavor. Some of our member states are part of the United Nations Security Council. And in the Security Council, we have been urging the United Nations to come forward with a comprehensive strategy to deal with the LRA. And I'm very pleased that that has now been achieved. And my colleague Abu Musa may tell you more about that a little later. Finally, I just want to say that we, on the donor side, felt the need to coordinate what we do. And I'm very pleased that together with the Americans, European Union co-chairs something called the International Working Group on the LRA, which helps to coordinate the efforts of donors to make sure that we're not duplicating and wasting your resources. At the end of the day, the European Union is a political body. And as you know, politics is about setting priorities. And priorities depend often on lobby groups and interests. And how much we continue to do on the LRA issue depends very much on what you say and how you say it. So carry on, keep pushing, because what you do encourages us to do more. We need your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Philippe, thank you so much. Representing the United Nations, the Special Representative of the Secretary-General, Abu Musa.
Thank you. As I want to mention 2 anecdotes. As I was listening to Philippe speaking to you, it reminded me of an incident during which both of us were caught, were captured in a way in Liberia many years ago. We never knew that one day we'll be assuming more responsibilities in this domain. The second anecdote has got to do with what a minister said when we met in Yambio. Lord Resistance Army. He says, no, we should call it Satan Resistance Army. On a serious note, I would like to bring you warm greetings from the United Nations Secretary-General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. He has requested me to convey his strong commitment to our ongoing combined efforts to stop the LRA from committing its brutal acts. I would like to offer my appreciation to the conveners for the bold step in organizing today's event, which brings together some 10,000 people from around the world. I commend all of you for your humanitarian work and the peace efforts you shoulder on the ground. You are indeed, on a day-to-day basis, on the front lines, risking your lives for the sake of peace. Your actions, alongside those of the United Nations, the African Union, and other actors, are vital to meeting our common objective of effectively addressing the threat posed by the LRA in Central Africa. To win this war against one of the most brutal armed groups of our time, coordination and partnership are essential. Coordination at the regional level and partnership among the various actors engaged in the field. This in turn calls for strong political will and support. Such support has been demonstrated by the UN Security Council at its 14th November 2011 meeting on the LRA, requesting the United Nations Regional Office for Central Africa under my supervision to coordinate efforts of all concerned to develop a regional strategy on the LRA in support of the African Union, the affected countries, NGOs, and civil society organizations. The strategy, which has now been endorsed by the Security Council, focuses on 5 key objectives. The first being arrest Joseph Kony and other LRA leaders and bring them to justice. Second, promote actions that will ensure that civilians are henceforth protected from the attacks of the LRA. The third being promote better coordination in the international community's effort to provide humanitarian assistance. Fourthly, promote disarmament, demobilization, reintegration across all LRA-affected areas. Support LRA-affected governments in the areas of peace building, human rights, rule of law, and development as the last one. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary-General in one of his public statements declared, and I quote, "War and armed conflict shred the fabric of sustainable development. They expand poverty, stunt opportunity, and undermine fundamental human rights," unquote. It is clear that armed conflicts, such as the one imposed by the LRA, attack the fundamentals of sustainable development. While children should be in class, they are being abducted and conscripted into armed groups. Adults are being prevented from carrying out their daily work. Rape and sexual abuse have become important as a tool of war used by the LRA. As you all know, peace, security, and development are intertwined, and their pursuit and entrenchment require our collective support for the simple reason that populations will never enjoy one without the other. I believe together we can win this war against the LRA. The United Nations remains committed and ready to continue to work with all of you. At this important event today, permit me to highlight some critical challenges. First, it is essential for neighboring countries in the areas affected by the LRA to find ways to support each other and work collectively to to track down LRA elements wherever they may be. Second, while governments in the affected areas have shown the will to protect all their citizens and pursue the LRA, they lack adequate resources. Unless we support them, they will not be able to fully deliver on their responsibilities. We must collectively stop the LRA, bring its leaders to justice, and address the long-term development needs of the affected communities. We must make sure that all necessary resources are available to all those involved in those endeavors. Never before have we seen the Security Council, the African Union, the affected countries, donor partners, NGOs, religious leaders, students, and the wider international community, including yourselves, speak with one voice on such an important issue. Kony 2012, move DC. We must move Kony out of the bush. I thank you. I thank you for your commitment to this cause and your large presence here today. We must not relent in our efforts. If at all there was even a moment to put an end to the LRA, it is now. We cannot afford to let this momentum slip away. Thank you. I will conclude by thanking our bilateral and multilateral partners, as well as individuals like you for their financial contributions. I also thank those who are providing moral support, volunteering their time, and those who continue to risk their lives in the field to support the noble endeavor. I must thank the governments in the sub-region shouldering the daily impact of Kony's mayhem. We count on your continued engagement to ensure that we finally put an end to the LRA. I thank also my colleagues from the United Nations, UNICEF, WHO, UNHCR, who are working together with the Invisible Children and other NGOs, national and international, for their assistance. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those great opening statements. John, you can take it away with the first question.
Thanks. I was just thinking it would be great if our presidential debates would be a little more substantive like this. Let's start, and let's go in this order as you spoke. Thank you very much for all three of these excellent statements. For ICT prosecutor Ms. Luping, you know, human rights violators and human rights perpetrators always have backers, especially non-state actors like the Lord's Resistance Army. It's not a government. It doesn't have a taxing power. It gets support. And over the years, it has been supported particularly by the Sudanese government and other non-state sources. I wonder, to what extent does international law and the International Criminal Court's own articles allow it to investigate the backers of those that are committing human rights abuses? You've done your part in issuing arrest warrants for the actual perpetrators, the leadership. I'm wondering if we can go a step further to those that are backing these guys.
Thank you for the question. We have the tools legally to go to investigate and prosecute anybody who aids and abets, who contributes to essentially a criminal common plan. We have the legal tools, indeed, to go for the backers. That is a possibility.
Well, this is good to know for us in the future here. Thank you. Thanks for being honest. It's great. To Mr. Maughan from the European Union, thank you again for your remarks. A little bit along those lines, you know, the European Union was probably the staunchest supporter, and a number of the governments within the European were the staunchest supporters of the creation of the International Criminal Court. And I wonder, a lot of folks in the audience, I don't think there is anyone in this audience, including us here on stage, who don't sometimes think, well, really, why is it that those that have created this court and allowed for this mechanism of international justice to exist, but then we don't have, as you pointed out, Ms. Luping, we don't have that mechanism to actually execute the warrants that the International Criminal Court issues. And so I wanted to ask you, from the European perspective, what more can be done to specifically target for arrest Joseph Kony himself? What more can the European Union contribute to help support the international effort to specifically target him as the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army? Thank you.
I think as Ambassador Carson said earlier, it's not one single silver bullet. I think there's a lot of elements that have to come into place. One of them is the diplomatic one, which we mentioned earlier, trying to cut off any form of support to the LRA, and to support those that are trying to track him and arrest him. The European Union has not chosen to concentrate its efforts on the military side. There are others that do that. We've been particularly concentrating on the, as I said, on the flanking measures, which are just as important, if not more important. I mean, we heard how the efforts of Invisible Children and others are slowly bleeding the LRA, and obviously leaving Kony more exposed. So I think that is absolutely critical work. Not specifically with Joseph Kony, but in general, we do démarche countries that support or allow allow the visit without arrest of people who are indicted by the ICC. But I think that the ICC is a relatively new phenomenon, and I think it will proceed with time. I think it'll get stronger as people see that it's working in a professional manner. And I hope that in the future more and more countries will sign on to it, including your great country.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Musa, there are peacekeeping missions. There are United Nations peacekeeping missions deployed in a few of the countries there in Central Africa. And these are a potential reservoir of support for a larger strategy of both apprehension of the suspects of the ICC and offensive operations, but also protection of civilians. And I wonder if you could speak specifically to what resources do the peacekeeping missions themselves need? What further resources do they need for them to become for these peacekeeping missions to become more effective in protecting civilians from these terrible crimes being committed by the LRA?
Thank you very much. Maybe I should first clarify that peacekeeping missions function by mandate. Each mission has its own mandate. Unfortunately, beyond that mandate, it will be very difficult for peacekeepers to go beyond certain limits. However, we've been engaging ourselves, both the African Union with the deployment of troops and our own troops, on how best we can harmonize the two resources that we have, because a lot of resources at our disposal. And we felt that in as much as the African Union deployed forces can go after Kony, the peacekeepers must be able to protect civilians in the villages that have been secured. And I think we need to continue with that dialogue so that it will be very imprudent for villages to be liberated. Then the Kony and his stooges come back again from the rear. So there must be a synchronization of action between the peacekeepers, the peacekeeping missions that are in the Congo, DRC, or in the Sudan, South Sudan, and those being deployed by the African Union. This is very, very essential.
Thank you, Ambassador. Back to you, Ms. Luping. So when war crimes are committed and they are prosecuted in an international court, they are prosecuted as specific crimes. And I think that the court has made great strides in, you know, highlighting abduction of children as a war crime. They've also, I'm interested in finding out more about the gender-based crime, gender-based violence crime of the orchestration and perpetration of mass rape. And I think about Congo, just one of the countries that's been so badly impacted by the violence of the LRA, also engulfed in its own civil conflict, where many estimate Congo has the highest rate of rapes committed within a wartime context of anywhere in the world. And so the question is, what is the state of the legal evolution in prosecuting war crimes, and what are the possibilities for a place like Congo, where mass rape is a specific tool of war, that the ICC may begin to issue arrest warrants for those that are orchestrating those kinds of crimes?
Thank you for that question, John. What I can say, also I think I speak on behalf of our Chief Prosecutor, Madam Fatou Bensouda, when I say this, is that the office is very committed to seeking to essentially tackle the heinous crime of sexually based violence against women and children. What we have done in our DRC cases, actually, a case I was also involved in recently against Germain Katanga and Matthew Ngajolo, a case involving leaders in Ituri, is to bring charges against individuals in the DRC responsible for both not only war crimes, but crimes against humanity of rape and sexual slavery. This is something the office is very committed to, and we're actively seeking to bring cases to prosecute individuals responsible. Bosco Ntaganda is another individual who's still at large. We have an arrest warrant against him, military commander of the predominantly Hema community military group. And we have actually added charges, crimes against humanity and war crimes in relation to sexual slavery and rape.
Well, I know I speak for Invisible Children for a second, and for the 10,000 here and many others, in saying that you will have full support for that agenda to move forward and ensure that we can create a real deterrent to the use of sexual crimes in the context of commission of war.
Thank you.
Mr. Maughan, we've been talking all morning about responding, to crimes that are already being committed. But I know that the European Union has done quite a lot over the last decade or more to develop the doctrine of prevention. Why wait till things happen and explode? Let's do things to prevent them. Can you elaborate a little bit about what the European Union has done in investing in mechanisms to prevent conflict, to prevent crisis, so we don't have to undertake these kinds of cleanup operations after the fact?
Indeed. Well, I mean, the European Union, like any multilateral institution or government for that matter, has a number of tools that it disposes of. And the primary one is diplomatic. It's pressure. It's raising issues up in conferences, in meetings. When we meet heads of state, these issues, we promote these core values and remind people of their responsibilities. The other issue, the other thing that we have is funds, and we fund. We fund from the bottom up. I mean, the most important place to fund is at the grassroots. So that's civil society movements that we have present here, supporting them financially, to organize, to sensitize. These are crucial. And again, I mean, these things don't happen overnight, they take time. And the important thing is to help those that are making things change. And I think that's the most important work that we do. We have big set pieces, we try to bring in legislations, but at the end of the day, it's changing people's mindsets. And that has to be done locally by the local people themselves. And I think that slowly but surely, things are beginning to progress in that sense. The other thing, obviously, is supporting international organizations that promote issues of prevention. So, yeah, we're involved in at many aspects. Obviously, because, again, one of the reasons the European Union is we came out of the ashes of the Second World War, and we're very aware of the need to prevent.
Thank you. I want to take the liberty again of speaking, at least on behalf of some of the folks in the crowd, to say that, you know, your investment, the EU's investment in the non-military aspects of the counter-LRA operations have been very critical. And so we want to applaud and support that, and also ask you as a member of the institution, the multilateral institution of the European Union, and your member states, to consider, in addition, at least, the necessary extra effort that needs to be made on the military side for some support for that as well, because I know that the need is infinite, and the resources on the U.S. side and on the African side are finite, and so your role could be very important. And I just wanted to say that it would be helpful, and we want to hear that from folks here. Ambassador Moussa, another question for you. I think all of us in this room have heard the terribly important doctrine of the responsibility to protect. In a nutshell, the idea is that if a state fails to protect its own citizens, or is the source of the harm against its own people, then that responsibility to protect becomes, in effect, internationalized. It's a beautiful concept. I mean, it's something that everyone around the world, when faced with as a principle, couldn't disagree with. But of course, with each case, it becomes a very, very difficult question of implementation, of how do you then actually make it work. And you have such an incredible resume and set of experiences over your career. If it's possible, and I know you're working with the United Nations and representing the United Nations, but if you can take a step back and say, here's how I think we can move closer towards making that beautiful principle of the responsibility to protect something that is actually implemented on a daily basis in our world today.
Thank you. You have raised a fundamental issue when it comes to in the areas of humanitarian interventions, and I could see very recently, I just came out of Ivory Coast during the crisis which went through up till April last year. And of course, I was in an organization, DPKO mission, where we had over 9,000 troops on the ground. I think one has to see the reading of what it is. How do we translate the concept, which is recent, not really recent, but is emerging, protecting populations. The reading, the understand, there must be a common understanding on how this is translated into reality. I give you an example. We have a country of about 20 million people. There's a crisis in the area. We have 17,000 troops. No matter how you want, each troop cannot be behind every individual. But there must be a way in which we secure the environment for those who need protection can come in, and they have protection. And I think this is how we are more and more we are looking into this. There is no way where the peacekeeping operations can offer all the protection if the government of where they are affected are not doing their job. But we can have deterrent, and we will need the support of the Security Council to mandate the peacekeeping missions on the ground. We need to offer environment for people to come in, because not necessarily the entire population that is in need is always a part of the country that will require support. So we need to work out in our plans to make sure that as we see situations unfolding, we have a very solid program on the ground that will take into account those populations that may be in danger. And I think that is where we are heading into. But I was answering to a journalist, a question by a journalist on the peacekeepers all over the world, and I'm saying more and more, the Secretary General would like to see less peacekeeping operations. Because when you see less peacekeeping operations, it means there is peace. And when there is peace, people can live in a very convenient environment for them to perform and contribute to their countries. So we should continue to see that we need to do something to be less aggressivity against the population. And that's why the Secretary General is investing in the second mandate on what we call the preventive diplomacy. And that's one of the reasons why my office has been created, and 2 others, so that we can anticipate crisis, and in which case we don't need to deploy peacekeepers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have time for one final question, and I want to ask it on behalf of the audience, because this is one of the most commonly asked questions at our screenings and events. And it is the following: what happens when Joseph Kony gets arrested? And the first way that I answer the question from the position of Invisible Children, from the work that we do as an organization, is the first thing that will happen is we will focus on the immediate rehabilitation and resettlement of the victims, of the captive women and children that are in the camp. And we've already made publicly, but I can do it again, to all of the delegates from the affected countries, that Invisible Children intends to make a big commitment when that happens for the rehabilitation of these affected communities. So supporters, heads up, we're going to have to raise a lot of money. We're going to have to raise a lot of money to make big commitments right away. So from an organization, that is how I answer it. Now, Prosecutor Luping, from the position of the court, when Joseph Kony is given to you, what happens? What happens when Joseph Kony is delivered to The Hague?
First of all, Joseph Kony, Okot Odiambo, and Dominic Ongwen, all 3 of them we want to see in The Hague. That's the first comment. When they're arrested and brought to The Hague, what we can guarantee all 3 of them is a fair trial. Our court seeks to maintain the highest of international standards. Okay? We want to see that justice is done and that it is done. So they'll get a fair trial.
And we will be watching that trial closely. Panelists, thank you so much for participating in the second half of the Global Summit on the LRA. Men and women, we don't always get the chance to hear from 8 world leaders representing 8 countries and 8 institutions. But I submit to you this, as a matter of principle, this is my personal view, but I really think it applies. The countries are led by humans. Institutions are led by people. Things that will affect our future as young people, like technology and social media, all of these things are only as good as the individuals within them. And that's why we were excited to bring members from the institutions to personally address you face to face and make the case. And as young leaders that are now working on the LRA and seeing how we can bring peace on the LRA, but those of us, we want to live good lives. We want to live lives that are intentionally bettering the lives of other people. I encourage you, the phrase we use at Invisible Children is consistency in our compassion. That means who you are on the inside, the way that you treat the people sitting next to you, the way that you treat your parents, the way that you treat your teachers, your bosses, your coaches. that needs to be consistent with your compassion to want to see peace in Central Africa. If we do that as young people, our generation, this millennial generation that is amazing, we will make this world an incredible place.